Hello there, you are watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. Well, it's time to see what's making headlines with the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and the peer and broadcaster, Baroness Hazarika. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Guys, thanks very much for being with us. Let's see what is on some of those front pages. We'll start with the Financial Times, which leads with the Prime Minister's concessions to rebel MPs on planned welfare cuts as Keir Starmer seeks to defuse the biggest crisis of his first year in office. The Eye says the PM has offered protection for existing claimants, but MPs are said to be angry at Number 10's bid to push through the bill in just a fortnight after a vote next Tuesday. Keir not faring too well is the headline for the Metro as the crisis comes at the same time as polls show reform have a significant lead. The reforms will now save much less than the projected £5 billion, says the Mail. In The Guardian, an MP says they had always hoped for an off-ramp, which the Prime Minister has now offered. In other news, Dame Esther Rantzen's daughter has hit out against online trolls who mocked photos posted to mark her mother's 85th birthday. The Express headline, How Day suggests she's on her deathbed. And The Sun are reporting that Cheryl Tweedy's stalker, a convicted killer, has flouted the terms of his restraining order and faces up to 5 years in prison. All right, let's bring in our guests for this evening, Henry Hill and Aisha Hazarika. Guys, thanks so much for being with us. We've got some news to go through as well, haven't we? Let's start with the front of The Guardian then, and their headline, Massive Concessions. Aisha, I'm going to start with you on this. Is it another U-turn? Second in as many weeks?
Well, it's definitely some concessions made because, you know, we've seen sort of different messaging on this. You know, last night the Prime Minister at NATO did a press conference. He was asked about this and he was quite tough in his language. Many people were criticising him as being quite belligerent. He said this was just noises off and the language had been quite, you know, we're not going to be making concessions, you know, we're going to sort of hang tough on this. But then I noticed this morning Douglas Alexander, the Trade Minister, was sent out. Now, Douglas Alexander is a very experienced politician. He served under the last Labour government when Tony Blair and Gordon Brown pushed through difficult reforms to welfare as well. And I noticed that the tone he struck this morning was very different. It was much more conciliatory. It was not sort of so much noises off. It was saying, look, these colleagues are friends, they're, you know, comrades, you know, we understand that they have concerns, let's try and get some sort of deal. So I think you saw things sort of thawing overnight. And then obviously there's been so much discussion tonight. My understanding that the negotiations happened really between a couple of senior select committee chairs, Meg Hillier and Debbie Abrahams, and the former Cabinet Minister, Louise Haigh. My understanding is they were sort of at the forefront of kind of going in and doing these negotiations with Number 10, and a deal seems to have been struck. Now, there seems to be three elements of this deal. It will only affect new claimants, so existing PIP claimants won't be affected. Secondly, a move on more money for employment support and bringing that kind of welfare to work plan forward, and an agreement to consult on any future changes to PIP. Now, this comes at a cost £2 billion. So this is not easy. I mean, I'm sympathetic to what the government is trying to do because the welfare bill is a big cost. There's a lot of loss of public confidence in the fact that these numbers are growing. But at the same time, the government also saw the writing on the wall and they were not going to get this vote through. Yeah, and, I mean, they didn't want to use the word rebel this morning. If you notice some of the MPs who were on defending it, they didn't want to call themselves rebel MPs. They said they were just working to try and make these changes. Aisha's pointed out there the money as well that was going to be saved. Where's it going to be found from now?
Yeah, well, we don't know, and this is going to be difficult. Obviously, there's the short-term question, the narrow question of where do they find the money from this particular thing. But there's also the broader question of when do you think the bond markets are going to notice that we have a government that can't deliver on a fiscal event 2 weeks previously? Because that's now the challenge that we're getting into, is that the government is already threading a very fine needle when it comes to public spending. Time after time, Rachel Reeves has structured her spending plans to go right up to the edge of the envelope provided by the OPR projections. It's one of the reasons that she has continually had to adjust those spending plans and either come up with more tax rises or spending cuts as the OBR adjusts things downwards. And now we're in a position again where if she makes some of those commitments, you might start getting the markets thinking, well, hold on a minute, we don't actually think you can deliver this. So the short-term answer is probably tax rises, because that's where you get. If you can't cut the winter fuel allowance, which frankly is the least defensive, is like the most obvious cut to make to means test the winter fuel allowance. If you can't do that, you can't really cut spending in any sustainable way, which means you have to raise taxes. But those will also be unpopular because you'll have to raise them on working people because there's no way to get round. Every country in Europe that has higher levels of government spending than we do has higher taxes on working people and middle earners. There's no way to do it by squeezing a few easy targets. And Labour MPs will hate that as well.
They will indeed. Let's bring up the Financial Times again, which leads on this. And Aisha, look, Henry's making the point that the bond markets are going to be upset if it's seen that this government can't push through these kind of changes. I mean, there is another option as well, open to Rachel Reeves, but she's never wanted to take it, of changing her fiscal rules, but that's not something that she'll want to do.
Well,
either.
I mean, I think she's been very clear that she doesn't want to change her fiscal rules. Remember, she did already change the fiscal rules to allow more borrowing for infrastructure, which is very popular with Labour MPs. And actually, industry is very popular. I've been doing lots of different events with the nuclear industry, the manufacturing industry. They're very pleased with the industrial strategy and the infrastructure and the planning. But look, Labour is coming up to its celebrating, or I don't know if celebrating is the right word, first year in power, which is a big deal. It's not often that Labour governments win power in this country. There's only ever been 7 Labour prime ministers in the history of British politics. So, look, I think people are going to be what the government would absolutely, and I'm not saying any of these scenarios are ideal, and this is not an ideal scenario to have had to make these concessions, but what the Prime Minister and team absolutely did not want to do is, in the week of their first anniversary, lose a critical vote. I mean, that is the worst option that was on the table. So I think they've had to be pragmatic. I mean, I think we can all agree it shouldn't have got to the position where it was in this kind of mess.
Is it pragmatism or is it weakness? I mean, do they smell blood in the water? Is that the reason?
Well, I think if you're about to lose a vote, you can't go ahead. I mean, if you were literally celebrating your first week and being in power and the whips are telling you and the maths just speak for themselves, and it's not just the usual suspects, it's not just people from the, Socialist Campaign Group, it is actually a lot of people who are, supportive of Keir Starmer. They kind of had to read the room. However, I don't know if they're completely out of the water on this because, I was speaking to a number of MPs tonight who have said that despite these concessions, they will still vote against the bill because they feel there's a story in the front page of the Guardian saying the young face a sharp rise in mental disorders. Many disability campaigners are saying that if this is only going to apply to new claimants, lots of those will be younger, a lot of them might have mental health issues. They feel that there might be a two-tier system. So I don't know if the government is out of the woods on this yet.
It's a really tricky one, isn't it? Because you'd hope, I guess, for a government that when you make a U-turn on something unpopular, you get the credit for that. But I think there's reporting that the change to winter fuel payment hasn't got the credit from pensioners that the government would have wanted, and perhaps they won't get the credit for this either.
No, I mean, but you very rarely actually get the credit. This is the thing. I can't.
You think you're going to get the credit, but it never actually comes through.
I can't think of many U-turns which have really got just squared the numbers with where you were before, because people still know you want to do it.
Yeah.
With this government, really, the big mistake, obviously there are lots, but the big one is the last King's Speech at the beginning of this session last year. That was their moment of maximum strength, Starmer and Reeves, right? All their MPs were just elected. They hadn't had time to realise that with however many hundreds of MPs they have, a decent chunk of them were just never going to get into the payroll vote, even if they wanted to. They hadn't had time for all of this to add up. The next election was a comfortably long time away. That was the moment that they could have got through maybe something like this, when they had that reservoir of goodwill. But now they squandered it, and we're now in a position where Labour MPs know all that's happening is the next election is getting closer. Many of them have small majorities, and there's no end in sight, right? That's the other problem. Normally, if you think about David Cameron when he did austerity is normally about, right, we're going to cut this, and then near the end of the Parliament we'll be able to spend and the economy will be picking up. But that isn't there with this. It's partly because Starmer hasn't sold a narrative on it, but it's also partly because his government doesn't actually seem to have a theory of growth. Reeves is cutting and cutting and cutting capital budgets in most places. So it's just propping up.
Should you agree with that?
Well, I think, look, mistakes have been made. I think the economic climate is really punishing at the moment. I think it is a very, very difficult, and you throw in kind of geopolitics, so, who knows what's going to happen with tariffs. It's a very difficult time. I think what I'd where I'd have a different view from Henry is that a lot of people say, why is it that when the Conservatives were in power, they were able to get away with austerity? And that's because that aligned with the values of the Conservative Party, which is a smaller state. I think the difficulty with the narrative for Labour is that people wanted change after 14 years of a Conservative government, and the austerity years, fed into that. So it just feels quite countercultural to what Labour's, brand is. When you speak to people from across the movement, not just people on the left, but even, moderates, you think, what are the things that a Labour government's really proud of? The creation of the welfare state, the creation of the NHS. So I think if you are going to tackle something like welfare, you have to do a lot of pitch rolling. You've got to try and bring as many people as possible along with you. And it's always difficult, even though I do think it is necessary to do that. I think the political management could be better. But I think, on the whole, most of the Parliamentary Labour Party, apart from a small group who are much more on the left, are supportive of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor's aim to reform the welfare state. They agree that, something is going wrong, but they are also very nervous about how it's been done.
Still got to find where they're going to get that extra £5 billion they were trying to make savings from. Let's move on to the Metro front page, because this kind of feeds into this. Of course, it's not the same story, but it does speak to where we find ourselves in our politics at the moment. This is that MRP poll, the poll of polls, really, that's found reform way out in front. I mean, I was kind of amazed when I read it this morning.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird, because on the one hand, it feels maybe it's a bit like SDP, Liberals in 81, when they temporarily got into first place for a bit, because technically Reform is still a third party. But on the other hand, this is a phenomenon really unlike we've ever seen before. They're really delivering smashing council elections whenever they've got them. And it's actually posing an interesting challenge for Farage. Because in the same way that one of the things that really plagued the SDP was that it was formed by Labour splitters, but then was an environment with a Tory government and found it easier to win Tory seats, and that ended up tearing it to pieces. In the same way, Farage, Reform's founded by hardcore Thatcherites, defected from the Tories. But now they're in a position where Labour is in office, and all but 9 of their second-place seats are Labour-held. And so Farage, being the man he is going after that gap. He's opposed to the 2-child welfare limit. He wants more spending. That's making life very difficult for Labour MPs, because suddenly they're stuck in a bidding war. But on the other hand, how many of Farage's core troops necessarily are really convinced by this? Is Richard Tice really up for this new high-spending Reform UK? I don't know.
Advertising everything. I mean, what's the sense within Labour, then? Do you think how
reform,
you deal with this challenge?
Reform, there's no question that there's a huge amount of momentum behind reform. You just looked at that recent by-election up in Scotland, which Labour won. Lots of people didn't think they'd won. That also, by the way, proves you can't completely write Labour off, because people, they got a good ground operation when they need to sort of get it together. But for reform to come third from a standing start, you have to take reform seriously. I think it's a massive wake-up call for the Labour Party. Also, the projections put the Conservatives... I mean, look, I know it's 4 years away, but I think the projections for the Conservatives were less than 50 seats. Yeah. I think it was like 46 or 47 seats.
Fourth place with just 46 seats.
Exciting times.
But I mean, that many, some would say. That many. But I think, look, so many people are dissatisfied with political institutions, the big 2 parties, dare I say it, mainstream media as well, big institutions. A lot of people are like, my life is just really hard, and it has been hard for a long, long time. We've put our faith in, kind of traditional politics and traditional media and traditional institutions. You are not delivering for us. And along comes the sugar rush of Nigel Farage saying, you can have it all.
MEP,
Absolutely, you can have it all. We're going to take all this money. We're going to, but that is seductive to a lot of people, because they're so exhausted and sort of depressed about, cost of living. There was an orthodoxy that, your kids would always do better than you. That's just not the case anymore. So, I think all parties have to take reform seriously. The one thing for Labour I would say is, yes, take reform seriously, but don't forget the left as well, because they're going to be urban areas where the Greens will come hard after Labour's vote as well. Gaza Independence, other parties, more on the left. So I think sometimes in the media world, we are completely dazzled by reform, and that's all we want to talk about. But there are other shifts happening on the other end of the political spectrum as well.
It's all in flux, isn't it? All right, Henry, Aisha, thank you very much for that. Plenty more to come from you guys. We'll be back after this short break, where we'll take a look at the Guardian, which has decimated and obliterated. That's how the US is describing attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities. But was the mission really a success? We'll discuss that and more next.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis, up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live.
Joins us live.
All in one place, and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirm that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Lough Neagh. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Let's get the thoughts now of Henry and Aisha. For these stories, here we're going to start on the front of The Guardian, actually, on the strikes on Iran over the weekend by the US, which the US are again insisting were a complete success.
Yeah, so essentially what this is about is how much damage did they actually do to the Iranian nuclear program? Because they did, it is possible to knock out, they're very complicated things, nuclear programs. Israel took out Saddam Hussein's in the mid-1980s, I think, when they hit the Tammuz reactor, and he never got the bomb, even though he was in power for another 20 years. On the other hand, before the operation, one of the big sort of talking points amongst security analysts was Fordow, the main enrichment project, is really deep underground. And so the thought was that even if you've got the bunker buster bombs, to actually put that thing out of commission, you'd have to go in and do a ground operation, which never happened. So the question is, obviously, they've done enormous damage to Iranian air defense assets, missile stocks, and all the rest of it, killed a lot of their military hierarchy. But in terms of the actual nuclear program, we actually don't know. It's a long way underground. There could be more of it left than Trump might like to think.
Yeah, and there's 400 kilos of uranium that's unaccounted for. There was a piece by William Hague, actually, in the Times a couple of days ago, saying that this might have pushed Iran actually on to getting a bomb.
The reality is we just don't know. Look, clearly some damage was done, but we just don't know the extent. I mean, the Iranians are saying, oh, you didn't harm a hair on the head of our... and you've got the Americans saying we absolutely obliterated it. So it's probably somewhere in the middle. And you have to ask the question, why was Israel still bombing those sites if they had been completely obliterated? I mean, I spoke to an interesting weapons expert saying that the most interesting intel will be from Iranian nationals who are involved in the nuclear plans, who want out and who will leak intelligence. That will probably be the most useful intelligence they can get.
And I guess we've kind of moved on from the whole legality of the thing now as well. Now we're talking about whether or not it actually did the job it was meant to do. OK, we've got a couple of minutes left, so we're going to talk about wedding of the season, wedding of the decade. Look how excited everyone is. Mr. Bezos and Miss Sanchez getting married in Venice. I mean, they look happy and rich.
I think the two go quite well. They go hand in hand. I think if you're generally that rich, you tend to be quite happy, have a big smile on your face. Yeah, so Jeff Bezos is getting married. He's his fiancée, of course, you know, first woman in space, allegedly, very recently. And they've gone to Venice, and the Venetians are not happy about it.
We've got some picture, I think, of the protests as well, of them not being happy. I mean, Venice is over-touristed. We know that. It's a former city-state, of course, but these billionaire couples and their friends are going to have a great old time despite the protests on the streets, I would imagine.
Oh, I'm sure they are. I mean, if you're one of the great things about being that rich is protests don't get nearer to you than you really want them to. But yeah, it is worth remembering that, you know, Venice and Milan and Genoa and a couple others, they invented oligarchs. They invented banking. The independent government of Venice, the ruler, the Doge, had a royal barge that was effectively sort of entirely gold-plated and was entirely sort of, Trumpian. Yeah. So in a sense, it's very much in keeping with the long and sort of august history of the Serenissima.
I just can't believe
full of rich people.
That Jeff Bezos didn't all give us a discount on Amazon today. I just feel that's the meanness in all of this.
Maybe it's coming on the wedding day. Maybe
maybe.
The day of his wedding, there'll be a big gift for all of us. I'm surprised my invitation hasn't arrived.
Black Friday and then white, whatever day.
Yeah.
Henry, Aisha, thank you both for that. As we look at these pictures of Bezos and Miss Sanchez. More from you in the next hour of the programme. Coming up, Sky News at 11. The Prime Minister's offered major concessions on his welfare bill. We'll have that and more next.
We're rolling. Welcome to the world. Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.